Okay, everybody. It looks like back after a long absence, and welcome to another Ask Me Anything event here at We the Governed. I'm kind of back in town. I've been gone for a couple weeks, and so I know as the first one back, this will be a little interesting just to get started here and catch up on some of the things that um, have kind of let slide over the last couple weeks. Plus the fact that there's, despite the fact that you may be going on vacation at times, it doesn't mean that the political world or process stops just because you're gone. And a couple things I just wanted to mention before we get into it, and people start asking questions. If you can, just do the @We the Governed so that I can see the question when you post it in the chat room next to the video. The other thing I wanted to just mention is that coming up, I just posted a video on my YouTube channel with an interview that I did with Brian Haywood, and it has to do with the Summer Freedom Fest 2023, which is coming up here on Saturday, the 29th, starting at 4 o'clock at the Willowcrest Stables in Redmond, Washington. This is the first year they've ever done it. I know Brian Haywood has hosted events there at his place before, but this is the first year they've ever done it where it's been more formalized and organized like the Summer Freedom Fest. It sounds like they've got about 40 booths or so. Hundreds of people have already RSVP'd. I think they've got a limit to the first 1,500, or maybe they can go up to about 2,000 people there. I don't know what the actual limit of the property is, but it looks like they're going to be having quite a few people there. I'll be there. So this come up Saturday. So if you do go, please come up and talk to me and say hi. Let me know that that you saw this video and that you just make sure you introduce yourself to me if I don't know you already. And there's going to be food there. They've got a bunch of food trucks. You do have to pay for food unless you're going to volunteer and help them out, in which case you get a food gift card of some kind so that you can actually get food that way. But they'll have live music. You get a chance to see a number of the politicians, the handful of Republicans that have declared for statewide office and who are raising money. And I think Brandy Cruz will be speaking. I don't think they're intending this to be like a constant series of speakers, but in between the live music, you'll probably get a chance to both hear those people speak and probably meet them in person. I know Semi Bird will be there. Dave Reichert, the recently declared Republican candidate for governor, will be there. Raul Garcia, who's shifted from running for governor to running for the state Senate seat or federal Senate seat. He'll be also there. And I'm sure there'll be a number of other people there. Expect to see lots of initiatives being signed for some of the initiatives that are going on right now. It should be a good event. I look forward to seeing everybody there. Sorry, I always get distracted with funny comments here. But anyway, TZ, it's good to know you're not prepared for questions today, so that's no problem. It seems like there's always some others that do tend to come out. But anybody, so Summer Freedom Fest, I posted a video up about it. I have the flyer there, interview with Brian Haywood, who's sponsoring it. And so you should be able to get most of your questions answered when you look at that video. It's not a long one, but I also, at the same time, last week, I was able to interview Brian Haywood about some of the initiatives. So I think there'll be a sequence of videos as we finish up the editing and get them launched this week, so that you'll be able to find out more about some of the initiatives that are coming out. For those of you who don't know already, on the referendum, which is Referendum 101, they were not able to get enough signatures to turn it in Saturday. I was gone for the last couple of weeks before that signature time, and I came back just a few days before the due date. And it sounded like they had enough and that they were going to be able to turn them in. They actually made an appointment with the Secretary of State's office, but they ended up falling just short of what they needed to be able to do turn in. So that was disappointing for those of us who went out and signed it and got involved in that process. But there were a couple lessons learned in that while that was going on. And it did provide a boost although it wasn't the intention, but it did provide a boost to a lot of the initiatives, which also got signed at the same time. But there were a lot of churches that were involved in helping collect signatures for Referendum 101. but they got started late. And so we really only had, from what I've been told by a lot of the organizers, several of the churches took a long time to make a decision as to whether or not they were going to allow the referendum to be signed in their buildings. And so that length of time, that delay, really cost them a lot. I think if they'd had one more week of signature gathering, they would have been over the top. In fact, that's pretty clear. The organizers sent out an email saying that 157,000 signatures in hand, the amount you have to turn in is 162,000 and change. And you obviously don't want to turn in just the minimum. You want to turn in an additional amount. But at the rate those signatures were coming in, if they just had another week, I think they would have been there. So that's too bad. And I think that it's just a reminder that when you're doing these types of especially a referendum with such a tight time frame, every single day counts, and delays in making a decision that seem logical in hindsight. Like, of course, those churches were going to make that decision, but because it took so long for them to put them in, that really cost them the ability to at least vote this November on repealing that law. Now, you still have the initiative, the Parents' Rights Initiative, which has had a big boost of signature gathering just because it was kind of tied hand in hand with the referendum at the same time. A lot of people signed the initiative as well, and that's off to a great start. So they're collecting a lot of signatures on that one. That's not due till December. Sounds like a long time, but you still have a lot of signatures to gather. So I think that they're doing pretty well on the signature gathering on that one, and I'd encourage people to do it. But remember, I think a sense of urgency is usually value added when you're trying to go out and collect signatures by a certain time frame and time date. So it's very helpful if when you get these, you just get them signed and turned in pretty quick. I think that makes a big difference. Now, I haven't done, I just finished a video. I filmed it today, but it will be launching tomorrow, or I think I'm going to try to launch it tomorrow if I can get it finished up here pretty quick. And even though I was gone and out of town for a couple weeks, I had time, like at the airport, where I could still get on the internet. And I filed actually a ton of complaints. That's what happens when you get stuck in an airport somewhere. There's nothing else to do. So I could get online, and I filed a lot of different complaints, caught a lot of different politicians and PACs and other groups breaking the law. And so anytime I have free time, I just catch up on a lot of complaints, and I have a lot more to file. But so I was able to catch up and nail a whole bunch of people, really. I did a video on some of them. I really can't fit them all the active current cases, into one small video. So there's actually a lot more out there. Law breaking is not hard for me to find when I'm looking at campaign finance violations or ethics violations, for that matter. But I got a feeling the PDC is feeling very harried right now, on, at least that's the impression I'm getting, that they're feeling harried with all the complaint volume that they're getting. And it's not just from me, but it's I feel like I'm adding a lot more just recently. And part of it's that I can see these violations, but it takes a little while to prep the complaint. So I need at least just a few minutes that I can sit down. I've got a lot of things templated, but you still have to sit down and verify. Just if I saw the violation, I need to go back and make sure that's actually happening, or that there's not something that might have changed since the last time I looked at their PDC filings. But I was able to get a lot done actually when I was at the airport, or stuck somewhere waiting for something, usually an airplane or a bus or something. So in doing that, I was able to catch up on a lot of complaints. I still have a bunch more that I've identified just in skimming and surfing the site. I've also been able to do a few different training sessions. If you were in Yakima last Thursday, hopefully you went to at least one of those training sessions that I did out there. I'm happy to go back out and put more on for people who can just organize a group of people together, and I can help train you to become more active and engaged in your local government officials. One of the things I am trying to encourage people to do is to set up websites. I was also on Whidbey Island on doing a presentation out there on Friday, and I'm kind of encouraged by the number of people that are engaging and getting involved. There's a great story out there that I want to hopefully do an article about, involving the Low Income Housing Institute, which people know as Lehigh, down in the Seattle kind of King County area. And it's particularly significant, grant grifting operation. It's part of the homeless industrial complex. And one of Frank Chop, former Speaker of the House, it's his little scam that he runs. But they get a lot of grant money, and they were caught basically what looks to me like influencing and or falsifying assessment, property value assessment, in order to convince the taxpayers to pay a lot more money for a building, so that they could ensure that there's going to be only more homeless drug addicts in Whidbey Island, because Seattle doesn't have enough, and apparently they want to export them. The Seattle's #1 export in King County is going to be homeless drug addicts, and so they're trying to get them out and spread them around the communities. And Lehigh is instrumental in helping make that happen. So anyway, that's one of the things that I noticed when I was there, and it's a good story. I've got a lot of the data. I just didn't quite have enough that I understood it thoroughly enough that I could do a video on it today, but I'll probably be doing an article and/or video about that pretty soon. Jason, you got a question here. Looks like Jason's the guy always putting in a few questions here. What are your thoughts on Seattle losing its homeless camping ban case, and now Portland wants to give out syringes and foil to drug addicts? Actually, I think Portland's been giving out syringes and foil to drug addicts for a while. I know Seattle has, so there's probably nothing new about that. I'm not sure where Seattle has just kind of put itself in this downward spiral, and they are trying to shift some of their drug addicts out of some of the core, most obvious areas of the city. You had the recent Taylor Swift concert over the last couple of days, and then Seattle miraculously during the Taylor Swift concert seemed to have the ability to at least remove the most violent and confrontational, worst of the drug addicts and the camps kind of away from the large crowds of Taylor Swift fans who probably increased the net GDP of the Seattle area by a couple points there. I had a couple daughters that went, and it sounded like a madhouse, but they love Taylor Swift and they had a good time there. So I think that they can move homeless when they want to, and they wanted to for that, but they're basically going to let them come back in. Of course, the challenge is that what stays in Seattle what happened in Seattle certainly doesn't stay there. So it spreads, and people like King County Executive Dow Constantine, and of course the political establishment in Seattle, they are trying to shift to these drug addict homeless camps out further and further. You see them shifting them to Renton or Burien. In Burien, they've had some friendly council members there who decided that they would love to house as many drug addicts as they could find and pretend like they're just homeless and not drug addicts, even though that's what they are. And so Burien's been abused by it. Tukwila, Renton, Kent, Federway, a lot of these cities in the area. So, and yes, I know it was Smack Daddy Dow Constantine. I do know that's his name. Todd Herman reminds me of that every time he says his name out there. But anyway, so Constantine, of course, is heavily engaged in this, and part of it's bribing the cities with cash. Well, what I saw up at Whidbey Island, in kind of the south part of Whidbey Island area there, it looks like what they're trying to do is basically the same thing, is kick that those homeless camps out there using whatever excuse they can, the drug addict camps. So they want to buy buildings and put them in there so that when they pass out cooking meth or whatever, they can burn the buildings down and maybe somebody gets an insurance payoff. I don't know. But it's definitely part of the scheme that's been going on. Nothing new about it happening right now. I just think that there's always a lag time between when they start implementing these policies and when people actually start to realize what's going on. There's a draft article that I had, because one of the things that changed kind of when I was going away is there were some changes in the governor's race for Washington State. And so I was going to do a video. I will still do a video about this, but just to give you my sense of what I think's happening there. And obviously that race isn't until 2024. Everybody's seen this video. If you live in Washington State, you have ballots that have been sent out to you for the primary election in August for a lot of local races. And the participation rate probably across the state is going to be somewhere around 22 to 30%. Very small turnout. It's August. People are on vacation. People are gone. People aren't paying attention. The ballot got lost in the mail, or piled on the countertop with a bunch of other things. A lot of people aren't participating, and yet it really matters, because your vote right now is actually going to matter more in these local races than they will in others, particularly school board races, city council, and sometimes some local propositions as well. And so it does matter that you pay attention and you vote. Moms for Liberty has actually done a great job recruiting candidates for school board this cycle. A lot of other groups in the state have done a better job than I've ever seen, actually, in giving a wide range of options on some of the school board. some of the school board races. So you have the ability to vote for people who believe in math. Sometimes for some of you, it'll be the first time ever. You'll have the opportunity to vote for people potentially who actually want the kids to be educated, not indoctrinated. You'll have people who may understand what a budget is and the fact that it might be a good idea to actually follow it. Lots of radical ideas like that are potentially in existence with some of these new proposed school board candidates. So those votes really matter. Now I'm going to shift and talk about the 2024 race because it's a governor's race and everybody's talking about it. And the issue is you had some changes that came up since the last time I really did a video about this. You essentially have 3 Democrats and then you had 3 Republicans in play for the state governor's race. I mean, I'm summarizing it. There are 24 people technically that are listed on the Public Disclosure Commission website as running for governor. One of them is Inslee, who said he's not going to run. A second one is Raul Garcia, who has since made an announcement that he's not running, and he's shifted and he's going to run now for the federal Senate race, which is very different. And then you have the front runner, Angel of Darkness himself, Bob Ferguson, current Attorney General. He's running for governor. And so he's probably the worst choice Washington could ever find. He has the most money, but according to all the polls, actually, he's very unpopular, even among Democrats, surprisingly so. So he's not a strong candidate, as that might indicate. Then the next Democrat, the next least worst Democrat, but still not a good one, is Hillary Franz. Now, Hillary Franz, the current Department of Natural Resources director, and so commissioner, and so she's commissioner of public lands, and she's running against Ferguson, and she's actually very aggressive. She has about $250,000 in the bank, a lot less money than Ferguson does, but she has access to a lot of big donors, and so I would anticipate that she can raise actually quite a bit more money than what's currently reflected at the PDC. More significantly, she actually seems willing to put up a fight against Ferguson very specifically, and that's who she's targeted. Primarily, I've noticed this with her push at the PDC to hold Ferguson accountable for transfer of funds from previous max out donors, and assuming that falls out correctly in her favor, that's going to probably restrict Ferguson's ability to raise another $1 million, give or take. So that's a bonus for her, and she's pushing hard on that. So she's also a more likable person than Ferguson. So as much as I still think she's pretty extreme, she's probably the next least worst, and the two of them right now are kind of in a mud slinging contest between the two of them. The third Democrat is Mark Mullet. Mark Mullet's the state senator from the 5th legislative district, kind of out by Issaquah. Mark Mullet is running what I would generally consider at this point in time, particularly because of the makeup, as I explained, the Republican side of the field. Mark Mullet's running kind of a hopeless cause campaign. Now, he raised the second most amount of money in the state because a bunch of lobby world money poured into his campaign when he announced. And the reason why he did that is that alone among Democrats in the Senate, I think he's the last Democrat in the Senate today who actually believes math is real and he understands what it is. And he runs a small business, a real one, not a grant grifting operation. So he actually has to sell product to customers, and he has to, his business actually has to make a profit at the end of the day. And so that has always been a problem with him for Democrats because he is attached to reality, and they don't want people like that in the party anymore. And that's why Inslee came out and tried to take him out of office about 3 years ago during that race. So Mark Mullet's bitter about that, and understandably so. The Democrats have decided to sabotage him because Inslee came out to try to take him out. So Mark Mullet was going to run as this centrist kind of candidate, which was probably not an irrational effort on his part, but he would get no Democrat support of any measurable significance, and he would get some Republican support. That's kind of his theory. But all the wind out of that sail has just gone away, and it's been becalmed because Dave Reichert just recently announced that he was going to run for office. Dave Reichert's the former 8th Congressional District. He's a congressman up until a few years ago, and he is the former King County Sheriff. He was the guy that caught the Green River murderer. That was kind of his claim to fame. And now he's jumped into the race, and a lot of the same funding for Mark Mullet is likely to shift into Reichert's camp at this point in time. So I think Reichert jumping in the race probably hurts Mark Mullet the most. So I think Reichert is he's going to be the presumptive front runner just because of his previously elected background and probably his access to resources and fundraising skills. That's going to help. And he's been elected in part of King County before, because the 8th congressional district covered part of King County, quite a bit of it. So that's going to be kind of the argument for Dave Reichert's campaign as he just initially launches. So he's very new in this whole process. That's within the last 2 weeks. And that's why Raul Garcia stepped down right after that happened. And so that leaves Semi Bird, who's really the more conservative candidate running for office right now. So the question now is, with 5 viable candidates, viable being defined as people who can raise money, they will campaign, they're serious about it, they have a realistic ability to keep going out there, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, they have the ability to go out there and keep hammering away. Then how does that affect the race quite a bit? Well, one thing I think that happens is that pretty quickly here, I suspect that you're going to see, you may get a couple people who just file to run for governor, but they don't actually do anything about it. For the most part, I don't think you're going to see any other big dollar sort of fundraisers, serious campaign sort of organizers jump in the race at this point in time. I mean, the die is going to be cast in the cast of people who are running. Now, that's probably fairly good for the Republicans in the sense that if there's only 2 of them in the race, it's likely one of them comes out of the primary with a decent amount that they can get in the top 2. That at least looks more likely. So especially with Mark Mullet staying in the race, I would say that gives them a better chance of a Republican for sure getting on the ballot, and the Republicans not doing the thing that the Republicans like to do, like they did in Lieutenant Governor's race and they did in the Secretary of State's race, where they flood the zone and then everybody cancels each other out in top 2 primary. You don't get a Republican to come through. I don't think that's likely to happen right now. So I'm feeling better about that right now. So anyway, that's, but we'll see. It's very early days. I've had a chance to talk to Semi Bird a number of times over the last, because he's all over the state. If you see him, he's actually going to a lot of events. He does seem to be building up kind of a conservative grassroots support behind his campaign. I don't see, Reichert won't probably be focused so much on that. I have talked to Reichert in the past, back when he was in Congress a few times. I don't know him well in the sense that we're not pals or anything, but I'd be happy to chat with him. I've seen him at the Roanoke conference, I know, a couple times, but we'll have to see, we'll see what happens. There's a question here about, in your opinion, is the airport infrastructure collapsing? No, actually, I don't think it is. I haven't seen anything. I used to travel a lot. I still travel driving, but I don't fly as much anymore. So I wouldn't say that I'm the best person to look at it and say whether I know or not the airport infrastructure is collapsing. I don't feel like that's the case. I think the airports are not necessarily collapsing. Now, you have old airports like some of the ones, some like Chicago or in New York, especially LaGuardia or JFK or some of these older airports. I mean, they always feel like they're kind of crumbling a little bit, but that's been a perpetual issue for half a century, and they just keep, they'll keep doing some upgrades on them as they go along. I don't think that's what's happening right now. Vancouver, Washington seems in good shape. Just got back from this. Is Cristiano. Just got back from there. Any comments on the people running the city? Actually, I have done some stories on the city of Vancouver in the past. And there does seem to be an increasing activism for the good, mostly out here in Vancouver, which is kind of amazing because they're right across the river from Portland, right, which is just self-immolating at every turn, trying to destroy itself as fast as possible. And I don't know if it's just the contrast, and at least you have the Columbia River there, and even a meth head's probably not going to swim the Columbia River to get to Vancouver. There's still a lot of problems in Vancouver. Just today when I was driving through, I've been seeing the same homeless drug addict camps kind of popping up in some places along the street, but it's not as bad as Portland. I think that Vancouver has to be careful because they're likely to get as bad as Portland if they let the disease spread. But in the past, I've caught several elected officials in Vancouver who were out of control. But we'll just have to see how it is. Jason, you got a question here. The Democratic candidate for insurance commissioner is now running mandating liability insurance to own a gun, which is contradictory. that Washington bans concealed carry insurance. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure that you're going to get a lot of crazy Democratic candidates running for some of those positions. The one thing about insurance commissioner, unlike governor or even attorney general, is that nobody ever pays attention to the race at all. And so you can get some real fossilized politicians. Kreidler, when I filed a PDC complaint, he got fined from the PDC a little while ago when I filed a complaint on him. And he's the current outgoing Democrat county or state commissioner, insurance commissioner. And you get these people that are just, they're invisible in the political process. They've been around a long time. They've been grifting off the system, but then they happen to sneak into an office like that, and you hardly even know who they are. This guy or the candidate for insurance commissioner is probably not a good person. I have to go back and double check exactly how many are running right now. But that's one of those races where I think if you ran a sane person, you'd have a decent chance of prevailing. Don't run as a libertarian. We had actually a pretty good candidate running for Democrat county commissioner as libertarian last time, and he got taken out in the primary, in the top two primary system, by a Republican that was useless in every measurable way and shouldn't have had his name on a ballot anywhere. And he jumped in, and he was the only Republican on the ballot, and he gets through the primary, even though the Libertarian was actually running a pretty good campaign and pretty reasonable approach to that position. So the top two primary tends to be death on third-party candidates in almost every case. So, and I endorsed the Libertarian at the time over the Republican for sure. And I can't remember the guy's name now, but anyway, we do need sane people in these offices. They can cause a lot of mischief if you have somebody terrible there. It's not as bad as a really bad person in the AG's office or the governor's office, but it would be nice if we could get some good people running. Then let's see. There's a question here by Jim. You have a question about does Joe Kent have any chance against Perez in Washington 3, and what do you know about him? I'm in Eastern Washington. Sure, he does. Joe and I are doing a dinner together as part of we actually auctioned this off at the Lewis County Republican event a couple months ago. And we're supposed to coordinate and do this together. I talked to him a couple months ago, and we haven't arranged it. So listen, if you won that auction item, I know who you are and you know it as well. Joe and I are talking. We're trying to set up a date so that we can have that event set up for you. Joe has a good chance of winning against Perez in the 3rd congressional district, which is my congressional district. I don't see any other likely Republican candidate at this point to come along and dilute the field. And that is a +5 or more Republican district. It was ridiculous that he lost this last time. And I realized there was a lot of infighting on the Republican side. We like to do that to ourselves. So there were a bunch of Republicans who didn't want to vote for him because their candidate lost. That was kind of part of the issue. But hopefully that's water under the bridge, and he seems to be focused on running a solid campaign at this point in time. So maybe, but if it's just the two of them that comes down to at the very end, I imagine that Joe would likely win. The Democrats aren't total morons, despite what you may see when you meet them, especially these candidates. Perez is crazy, kind of a weirdo, but they will try to run another Republican in the race to try to dilute the impact of the top two primaries. So I would expect them to do that, if nothing else. If they can't find anybody who wants to run against Joe Kent, they'll try to find somebody that does that. So they should be prepared about that. Let's see. TZ, you got a question. Can the Republican Party pick just one candidate and rally behind one person so we get at least one Republican on the ballot? And the answer to that is no. They can try. They can't prevent, in the top two primary system, essentially the top two primaries, which means only top two vote getters in the primary go on to the general. In that type of a jungle primary system, the parties are actually weakened quite a bit. They don't actually have the ability to legally restrict in any way at all people that run under their name. They can self-identify, just like most the Democrats want everybody to self-identify, kids to self-identify as all kinds of genders or animals or helicopters or whatever it is they want them to identify as. The political, since the top two primary goes into place, any politician can self-identify with anybody that they want. They can identify with any party they want to. So because that removes the ability of the party to directly influence who they endorse, you don't have a party-controlled primary process anymore. What that means is they don't have a lot of control then who's running. Now, the solution that Caleb Heimbach, who, Caleb stepping down as chair on August 11th, but the solution that Caleb is looking for, and I think the Democrats are probably looking for something fairly similar, is that what they're trying to do is say, we want to have an endorsement event where grassroots supporters, PCOs, Republicans of all stripes, hopefully, come together and they get to hear the candidates in one forum, in one event, and then they get to make a decision in April, because filing week is in May. So they got to make a decision in April. Here's our preferred candidate out of the mix of 5 that are on the ballot. The theory being that if the Republican Party does that, and the Democrat Party maybe to some extent does that, that they're able to then restrict at least the people who would say, listen, I want to vote for Republican, but I can't tell which of these guys is the real Republican or the endorsed Republican or not crazy or whatever their story is. That's the theory that the Republican Party is going to use with that kind of endorsement event. And April is when it's scheduled for this next year. They haven't done that since the top 2 primary systems come into play. They haven't done that officially. They've done that. The presidential races are a little different because that's controlled by a different set of laws. But as far as like the state process goes, they haven't done that. So if they try that, I think that it may have an impact, but we just won't know. There's a lot of reasons. It's ego. There's a lot of reasons why people will jump into political races like that, Republicans in particular. And the Democrats have a much more stick, carrot and stick. The Democrats have a hardcore stick that they wage, that they're willing to beat up on any Democrat that does that to their candidates when it happens. And they're not afraid to use it. So they will definitely deny campaign services, deny access to the database. They will blackball any treasurer or campaign service provider that helps a candidate who's not playing the way they want you to play. They also have a carrot that Republicans don't have ever, and that is that they also have the ability to give them job offers in various state agencies. A lot of job positions are essentially bribes. They just give them a position to work there. And so senior political people or people who have political ability to make an impact, a lot of times the Democrats will use that if they're trying to prevent you from running for office. They want to say, hey, listen, you're not ready for this now, but we'll give you this cushy job, 6-figure job. We'll park you over here at the King County Assessor's office or in the Office of Insurance Commissioner or some other place in the state agencies. They have hundreds of these jobs out there. And you just sit there, keep a seat warm, and play nice, be a good boy, or be a good girl, or whatever pronouns they happen to assign to you. And maybe you'll prove that you're somebody that we could have run for a different office. That's what they'll do. And so the Republicans just don't even have that option because they don't control any element of government anywhere that matters. And so they don't have the job pipeline, and probably mostly they wouldn't be, I don't think they'd generally be that corrupt and overtly kicking jobs out for that. In Washington State, the Democrats have had so much control for so long that they're very used to just the bribery mechanism of kicking out jobs in exchange for keeping somebody off the ballot or something else if they've reached that level of significance. So I suspect that that's basically the Republicans are at least trying to get a carrot approach, like you'll get our endorsement, and it'll be an endorsement not just of political party insiders, but it'll be endorsement of the grassroots, or at least the grassroots that's willing to show up and actually listen and be engaged in the debate and say, okay, of these 3 guys, that's our best choice. I don't know what else you can do as a political party in a top 2 jungle primary system than that. So that's kind of a big deal. There's a comment down here about the Attorney General, Washington State Attorney General process having 2 potential candidates. They do. I haven't paid a lot of attention to that race yet because it's still early days and how that's shaping up. And one of them is horrific, of course, Monka Dingra. It might be possible for you to find somebody worse than her out there to run for that position, but it'd be really difficult. She's probably almost as bad as it gets. She was somebody that before she went to the state Senate, she's the 45th Legislative District state senator, she worked in the prosecutor's office in King County, and her primary job was releasing criminals early and trying to find an excuse to make sure as many criminals were released into the state as possible. Just a terrible person, nothing good about her at all. And of course, she wants to run for AG. So the Republicans, we really do need somebody who gets in there sane. They don't even care what party they're in at this point in time. It would just be nice if we had somebody who's sane and not crazy. And she is not the right choice. What is going on with DSHS? $100 million fine from a federal judge. DSHS, which is Department of Social Health Services, they run a lot of the kind of the welfare programs, various welfare type programs in the state of Washington, and especially the mental health portion of DSHS is a necessary part of what they do. So a lot of stuff is wasted there. It's one of the bigger agencies where you can really flood the zone with a lot of people who do nothing and get paid a lot for it. It's also has some of the most thankless tasks in government, where there's people who actually have to do real work, like helping the mentally challenged, like people who are really dealing with significant problems. And that is tough work. And it's just kind of hodgepodge where it's all piled in together. And they're getting fines mainly because they're trying to hide the truth from the public. No surprise if you've ever dealt with government, that seems to be a primary skill set that they have. And there's nothing they fear more, I think, than transparency and public exposure for what they do. And so DSHS got some fines. If you really look at that fine had more to do with the Attorney General's office and the people that they assigned to defend DSHS in the lawsuit actually engaging in completely illegal activity, trying to conceal information. And that's a bigger black eye to the AG than it is actually to DSHS, if you look at that case. Somebody, Diane, you're asking, isn't it weird to have a primary on August 1st when everyone is out of town on vacation? Sure. The problem is with the primary system is you have to have primaries sometime before, the November is going to always be the election. And so your option is to have a primary in September with very little time. That's especially when a mail-in ballot system, it changes the election process tremendously. So if you have an election in November, it means ballots are going out first week in October. If you have a primary in September, which is when most people would prefer it to be probably, you only have a month to campaign after the primary, and to raise money and to kind of get things organized before ballots actually drop and people are voting. And the complaint had been in the past, that's not enough time. So they moved it back to August. They've talked about moving it even earlier. But the other push point when it comes to determining when you have a primary is filing week. Filing week is in May. And if you push filing week back earlier, there's a lot of frustration that candidates have to decide so far ahead of time that only political insiders are going to have filed for office and everybody else gets left out in the cold. And May was about as late as they felt like they could keep filing week. And imagine if you're going to push back a primary earlier than August, it's going to be in July. And when in July are you going to do it? Well, it's probably July 4th, right? So I think they chose August for the primary. And really just this debate. I mean, I guess again, June is too close to filing week. So it's the least worst of a lot of bad options based on how they're looking at the primary system. Mail-in ballots are part of the problem. If you didn't have mail-in ballots and you just had one day for voting, then you could move the primary to September and you would have at least 2 months after the primary then to be prepared for the general election. So that's what you're looking at right now. Let's see. Who pays for the mutilations that kidnap children after this horrific law? By the way, I never saw a petition here in Tri-Cities. I looked. This is a question from Jim. Well, I'm sorry you never saw a petition there. There's signatures being gathered right now on the initiatives, which aren't due till December, in Tri-Cities right now. I was just out there meeting with some of the activists. So I know they're collecting a lot of signatures, actually, Jim, right now for that. The referendum, a little bit less knowledge, but I do know they had a ton. I picked up a whole pile of referendums that were signed in Tri-Cities and brought out to be counted. The question about who pays for mutilating kids who are convinced that they need to change their gender when they're 12. and they get taken away from their parents and concealed, and then it happens, and then it goes back. Their parents pay for them, of course. They'll send them the bill. This is the whole thing with this healthcare, secret healthcare. Basically, it's given to your kids, and you can't figure out what's going on. If anybody has a kid over 13, you've discovered this at the hospital. Even when you try to get the waivers signed, because you've been responsible for helping them with their child care, and maybe they have medications or something else that you're trying to help them with. And it really makes it awkward and difficult to maintain adequate health care for your kids, because they don't know when to schedule their appointments or what they need to have an appointment on, or to get a second opinion, or what's going in. They don't know that, despite what the Democrats, I guess, are trying to tell you. And so you're trying to go out and help them. And then you discover that the law that was changed, different law years ago, where they made it now, you can't even, it's a separation between parents and the kids, trying to create this artificial barrier there. And this recent law with 5599 is kind of like this next logical step in that process. And they, of course, are going to make the parents pay. So you won't approve it. You won't even know about it. The kid could have something like this happen to them, and then they'll make the parent pay. Now, what'll probably happen is you won't see a lot of these things happen at once, right? If we don't overturn this. So not a lot happens at once. The grifting operations that are going to exist to help brainwash kids, to convince them to run away so that they can put them in these secret places that they hide from their parents, that takes a little while to get going. And right now, those people are getting excited about their opportunities, and they're moving forward on it. But as we start to have more stories like that, it's going to be, unfortunately, worse. And don't think if you're in Idaho or Montana or something, you're safe. You aren't. They're totally making it so that in fact, they're going to encourage getting kids from those states and bringing them here. It'll be a fiasco, depending on how significant it gets going. Again, sometimes it takes a little while. There's a question here from TZ. Did I see the debate between Mike Lindell and Matt Braynard on Tim Pool's channel? They debated same day voting versus ballot harvesting. I didn't see that debate. I mean, I'm familiar with it. I'm familiar with those issues, but I would prefer same day voting rather than ballot harvesting. I realize that you have to do ballot harvesting in order to be competitive in the situation that we have in Washington State. I haven't found the Republican conservative side of the equation to be as effective at that process. And part of it's because we feel like it's slimy, and it is slimy. And so, of course, we don't want to do it. And so now you're going to have to get people who are willing to do that, even though it's slimy, even though it's dishonest, because it's the only way to be competitive. They did it in California. It helped the Republicans pick up a number of seats there. When we've been more active starting to do that in Washington, it does make a difference in the outcome of the elections a bit. So I didn't see the debate, but that's I don't know. I don't necessarily know who won. Matt Braynard's a very capable debater, and so I'd be interested in how they discuss that and what they finally how the final debate rounded out. Jason, question about my thoughts on the Mexico lawsuit against gun manufacturers, that they're alleging that semi-auto rifles they have been seeing all this time, that they're suddenly illegal all this time. I haven't seen that lawsuit. I don't think it's actually the first Mexican lawsuit that they tried to file. The Mexicans figured that the American legal system's insane, especially the civil action side of it. And so they figured, why not jump on the gravy train, maybe get a big payout, and you get a lot of political free press. And that's probably why they do that. Jason had a question here about why is there so much street racing now? I don't know that there's any more now than there ever was. Look at the old Renton Loop and the street racing that used to happen in the 80s. I know when I was in high school. And even in the 90s, I think that street racing has always been there. One of the things that has changed, of course, is the ability to fly a drone and get all this in video and kind of make an event out of it. And so I think that that's going to raise awareness about street racing. Plus, you had the cultural implications now that make it a little bit cooler. I just think all that stuff is going on. So, I think that's all you're really seeing. It's not that much different than what it's been in the past. I think it comes and goes in waves. Tina, you look like you have lost weight. Yeah, I did lose some weight when I went down. I went camping and hiking, really more hiking for almost 2 weeks down at the Philmont Scout Ranch in New Mexico, which I've never been to before. But my kids are in scouting. Two of my older kids have already been there before. My youngest son wanted to go. I went with him, and it was a lot of altitude hiking with a lot of elevation changes in the hiking profiles. So we spent most of the time over 8,000 feet. It was a great experience for him. When I asked him to rate it scale of 1 to 10, he rated an 11. So as far as I'm concerned, then that makes it a success. But so I did lose some weight, and I need to lose more. I mean, I'm fat and out of shape compared to what I've been in the past. So it's always good to lose a little bit of weight, even if that's how you're getting there. But there's nothing wrong with that. Despite all appearances, I used to be a competitive runner for many, many years, high school and college and post-college. So, but being an activist and sitting around filing PDC complaints is not the healthiest activity you can have. And so it's just nice to get out there and be a little bit more active right now. And that's what I did while I was gone. Let's see. Department of Commerce wants a trauma trainer for what? Don't know. I don't know what you're talking about that. Michael, you had a question about how's the PDC complaint against Ferguson going right now. Interestingly enough, there was a guy that actually beat me to that complaint. I had done a video saying I'm going to file a complaint on him, and then somebody else beat me to the complaint. And usually what the PDC, the Public Disclosure Commission, will do is if there's already that same complaint in there, unless you file it around the same time, if it's already posted, they don't file a second complaint of the same kind there. So when I saw that, even though it was a not very well done complaint, it was adequate enough to trigger the issue. Right now, it's on a hold mode, and there's a Thursday hearing, the Public Disclosure Commission. I'm going to try to see if I can get in there and testify, because Ferguson is trying to fight this battle through other people who have similar violations. And he's trying to use a decision by the Public Disclosure Commission that is in his favor, or at least it would be favorable to Ferguson in one of those other cases, to create a pattern that he can use then to get out of his own violation. And this all comes down to this large transfer of funds from one campaign for one office into another. And so Ferguson is using a Zach Sapone complaint that I filed as this kind of stalking horse case to get himself out of having to comply with that part of the statute. Now, keep in mind, the PDC, even if they find against him, they're not going to give him a fine probably for this. What they're going to say is you just simply have to come in compliance. And he doesn't want to come in compliance, because if he does, he's going to either have to refund a lot of money, potentially $1 million. I mean, in that ballpark, but it's probably closer to about $500,000. They just have to refund to people so that he can avoid the illegal over limit contributions, or it's going to be that plus a combination of him. It'll close the door on his ability to raise money from some other people, because they may have already maxed out to him in previous campaign. The most likely people to max out to him immediately again on this race. And now if he has those two types of contributions there, he has to give one of them up. That's not fun if you're Ferguson and you're as unlikable and as unpopular as it appears that he is in the surveys that have been taken about him recently. So therefore, he needs a lot of money to convince people that he's not a weirdo, that he's not vindictive, that he's not a creep. It's really difficult for him to shake that pretty accurate perception of who he is. So for him to get out of that, he's going to have a lot of money to do it. And he doesn't want to restrain or restrict how much money he needs. And let's face it, you're not a serious candidate running for governor at all unless you have $10 million. And he needs to get there. And he's working hard, promising everything that he can. But anyway, so it's just kind of a situation. We'll see what happens. But believe it or not, that PDC complaint, again, I don't expect him to be fined. I think that the outcome of that complaint matters a lot. So there's a question here, Peter asking, are you moving from Tenino? I'm assuming that's directed at me. No, I'm not. And I don't live actually in the city of Tenino. I live outside Tenino. I think Tenino is like 5 miles from my house. So it's about as close as I get to a city, the small and quaint city of Tenino there, and I'm not moving. So let's see. Yeah, you had a point here. There was some Siggy 80 ran into that medical issue in Olympia area. We tried to figure out how our team is doing. We're told that we had no right to know. I know. I mean, it's just absurd. if you're on good terms with your kids, of course, that's fine. You can resolve it and you can get the information you need. But it's if you are having a disagreement with your kid or having a fight or something like that, it becomes a disaster. So it's really bad. Lord's Child has a question about releasing criminals isn't a Democrat or Republican issue, although most happen to be Democrats, but it's an American issue. Sometimes I cry seeing what the founding fathers did and the globalists are destroying. I'm assuming that's what you mean. Yeah, I would say that being soft on crime and releasing criminals is certainly a Democrat Party platform position right now. I'm actually not aware of any Democrat in Washington State in any significant office anymore, with the possible exception of Mark Mullet in Issaquah, who's doomed, right? The Democrats are going to take him out. I don't know any of them that actually don't seem to have endorsed this idea of taking the most violent criminals and just unleashing them back in the community, not letting them serve time or just saying that they're misunderstood as they're raping and killing people. And at the same time, generally Republicans, they might be weak on the issue in some cases, but at least they generally recognize that crime is bad and you might need to have some punishment. This is an old story. Politically, it came about in the 50s and 60s. Don't think it's much different, actually. The difference is there's more of a sophistication behind the justification now, whereas the experiments of the 50s and 60s in releasing violent criminals early and experimenting no bail and experimenting with limited sentences and with lots of repeat opportunities to commit crimes. The end result is the same, right? Whether that's then or now, when they started to do that, crime radically increased, just like it is now, for the same reason. And that was what caused James Q. Wilson to put out some of his, it's been called broken windows theory. But if you read, there's a series of books that he wrote, and I read them when I was in college, but they came out in the late 60s through like the early 80s. And they had a big influence on Rudy Giuliani and a number of other Republicans at the time who were trying to actually fix some of the problems in the urban core in the urban cities with prolific crime. And it comes down to a basic fact that a very small percentage of criminals commit the majority of the crimes. No surprise if you've paid any attention at all to criminals in your area or ever spoken to anybody that had some familiarity with them. There are prolific criminals. These aren't the random people that one time committed a crime and then felt bad about it. These are the guys that live that way every day. That's all they do is commit crimes. The run-in that I had with that shooting on my property back in October was an example of one of those criminals, right? A guy that has lived his entire life committing crimes and preying on the most vulnerable people in the community. And so that issue is a distinguishing issue right now between Democrats and Republicans. There's not always that clear cut of an issue, but crime is rapidly becoming one of these things where the Democrats, for whatever reason, have decided to just go full woke and full crazy on the left-wing talking points on this. And so they're very happy to presume that you're going to be the victim of the next criminal. And remember, it's a very elitist attitude. The people that push this presume that because they live in gated walled communities in Redmond or Kirkland or Seattle or someplace that they feel like they're fairly insulated from it. They don't really care what happens to you and I who live out in the sticks or the hinterlands, right? Or a neighborhood that's not so nice, and they don't really care what happens to us. And it's ridiculous. So, that's one of the issues. And I think that is I think you're just wrong. I think that is a Democrat and a Republican. It's one of those few issues where there's very, very obvious differences right now at this point in time. There's a question from Michael. I'm assuming you're saying, are YouTube chats read, or do I read YouTube comments? I read YouTube comments all the time on my channel. I try to respond to as many of them as I can. I don't necessarily read them every day, but I try to stay on top of it quite a bit. So just in case you want to know. So I do try to read the comments on my YouTube channel. Jim, you're following up on a previous question here. You're saying, so parents are forced to pay for forced mutilation, second mortgage to mutilate my kid without my knowledge. Just want that out there. Is this the case? Yes, it appears to be the legal case. Now, how many times is that realistically going to happen in the next year or two before probably the law gets changed? I don't know. If you're on good terms with your child, is it likely to happen to you? Probably not. If you, if you pay attention to your kids and you're involved with them and you're on good terms with them, it's probably less likely to happen. But there's a lot of different family structures out there, and a lot of different situations. People are in divorces where the kids are in different houses with perhaps different philosophies and how they manage the kids. Your kids could be getting indoctrinated at school or even at church or some other place that's not influencing them in a good way that could point them in that direction. Remember, there's going to be predators and others, people that will find vulnerable kids and try to take advantage of them. So yeah, this scenario is likely to happen, unfortunately. Let's see. Jason, you had a question about what my thoughts are on the DeSantis campaign. I honestly never seen a campaign self-destruct this fast. Well, I have. I've seen political campaigns self-destruct a lot worse. Listen, it's really, really hard to run for president. I don't care how good you are, who you are. There's a bunch of Republicans that have jumped in the race to run for president that clearly have no chance in heck of getting out of the 1%. Just like Inslee, when he decided to run for president, couldn't break 1%. He was just a failure. There's a lot of Republicans that are jumping in the presidential race, and they're going to have the same outcome. I didn't really think that DeSantis would have that problem because the reality is he's a good governor, a very popular governor in Florida. He's done a lot of good things. It doesn't mean that he's got a good organized plan or campaign to run the country. It's really hard to do that. And he was probably the best positioned Republican out there beyond Trump who could maybe run a national race. But I wouldn't totally write him off yet. I mean, you always can turn these campaigns around. We've seen this happen before, but yeah, it's not great, especially when you're trying to explain to your donors, that's not going well. We'll see. Jason had another question here. Jason, you've been asking a lot of questions, and I see some other people in here who have a few other questions too. How does one satisfy the train requirement starting January 1st? And can you do a video on what semi-auto rifles are still legal in Washington? It seems like everything is illegal now. There's a good website, and I think I mentioned it earlier in the comment section. I think it's WashingtonGunLaw.com. The attorney who has that website puts up a lot of really good information. Now, obviously, there's a lot of lawsuits challenging the absurdity of some of the gun laws in Washington state. So I don't know. The training requirement you're referring to isn't as egregious, I don't think, as Oregon's or what's happened in Oregon. But I can try to do something like that that's gun focused. But there's just a lot of other issues that are going on right now. So that would be a more specific issue that I'd have to look at. The TZ, you mentioned something down here. I would say talking to your kids before teachers do is a good idea. It's not just that, though. It's also, making sure you're aware of adults or organizations or something that may be trying to influence your kid in some way. At a certain point in time, and let's face it, when they're 18, they're beyond your control that much at that point in time. I mean, parents want to keep influencing their kids, but if they decide to go off on their own, and do their own thing, there's only so much you can do as a parent at a certain age. When they're younger, you have more control, and hopefully you have a good relationship with your kid, and you're able to keep them from going into crazy zone like this. And again, I know that there's different family situations that pop up, and I don't judge that specifically. I just know that it can be tough if you're in those situations. So this is my first. This has been my first live stream since I was gone for a while. I am doing this at the 6:30 time slot instead of the 5:30 time slot. I think that this has been more popular in the past at this time. I'll probably try my next one around the same time so that, people are able to get home from work and they'll have a little bit more time. I've this live stream format. I'm comfortable with this format. I'm just not always certain that it's that it's the optimal format to communicate with people. And so I am always looking for feedback on how I can make it better, or if there's a different time to do it. I don't think I should do this more than once a week at the most. And so I think that there's probably other ways to interact and be involved with me or the work that I'm doing at We the Govern, if you're interested in it. The one thing I have found recently with several of the training programs that I've been doing over the last few months, I feel kind of a passion for this, that I'd like to train people to become more active and capable as an activist, organizing teams of people in their community to make an impact where they live, the school board, the city council, the county commission, just in their local community. And largely when I do these training sessions, you just get the benefit of learning from all the mistakes that I've made. And I made almost all of them, I think, at some point in time, and the successes that I've had, because I've had a lot of successes as well. And because I've worked with so many different people around the state and sometimes in other states as well, I feel like this is a very practical skill set to be able to spread out and to teach other people. And I'd like to do that as much as I can. So I think that that's something I want to do a lot more of, and in the coming months and years, is do a lot more training as much as I can to people in different parts of our state and other states as needed, to help them become more effective at organizing groups and teams of people to make a big impact where they live. It's very much something that I think more people need to be involved. We don't need a huge percentage of the population to do it. We need somebody to do it. And we've had decades, I think, where people have largely, at least on the conservative freedom and liberty side of things, we've kind of abandoned the field and allowed government to kind of metastasize and become what we see today, where there's a lot of problems. And so there's a lot of work, I think, that we can do to make a pretty big impact if you know the skills. It just saves you time. If I can sit down and I can help you save time. I can help you save the heartache of making predictable mistakes. I can probably help you be focused in a way that I think a lot of people struggle with. And I'm very, very optimistic that with a little bit of assistance, I could probably help a lot of people get there. So keep me in mind if you're interested in doing training like this. I just need you to organize people in your community who have like-minded interests in being involved and engaged. And that's usually what I use to the people who organize like that. Then I'll come out and make presentations to them, just like I did in Yakima recently, as I've done in Whidbey Island in the past, or San Juan County, or Whatcom, or Clark, or Spokane, or anywhere. I'll go wherever the people are who are willing to organize and push back. I don't care if you have a Republican governor, technically a Republican managed government, or a Democrat managed government in your local area. That doesn't matter to me, because the reality is, regardless of what kind you technically have, the party label doesn't really matter. Are they, no matter what, they're probably not pushing enough freedom and liberty where you are, and they're probably not looking at government the way it needs to. And wherever two or more bureaucrats are gathered, I tend to find bad things tend to happen. So you want to be engaged and involved. So yes, I see Tacoma. If you're in Tacoma, I'm happy to help you. You got to find some more people. I'm willing to do small groups, but you really want, nobody's an island. You have to get more people together to be successful. So and with that, I think we've been doing this for about an hour. That's usually about the time I try to kind of close shop on these live streams. If you're watching this after the fact, feel free. You can still add comments down below. I do look at those and I will respond. Feel free to share this with anybody else that's interested. If I'm in any way at all potentially value added for you in a training operation where I can go out and help in your community, please reach out to me, and I can do that. Get in touch with you, and we can figure out a time to do that. You best reach me through the website. If you kind of track, I'm in the process of making a bunch of changes, website changes, logo changes. It's a bunch of other things, and it's still in process. As a charity case, kind of surviving on the support and charity of others, I don't have a massive resource base, so I'm trying to upgrade a lot of this on my own. But I think or with some of the people that are helping me here, but once I get that done, I think I'm gonna have a bigger launch this year, and hopefully really, really be able to push out and train. My goal is to train thousands of people in Washington state and some of the surrounding states as well. I think if we do more of that, it's more likely that we can help shift the process away from where we see government going today and in a better direction in the future. So with that, I want to thank everybody for getting online and all the comments and questions that you had today. I hope I did a semi-decent job in responding to them and answering them as best I can. We'll probably do this again next week. I'm planning on sticking to this time unless I really hear a lot of feedback otherwise. And otherwise, don't forget to like this and share it, and do something to kind of boost the algorithm of these videos. Big tech doesn't like what I do, and neither do the Democrats, surprisingly. So feel free to share it far and wide. And with that, we'll talk to you next time.